What is going on, Chess YouTube? So in today's video, we are looking at the first ever game played between the reigning world champion Ding Liren and the challenger Gukesh D. This game is Ding Liren versus Gukesh from the old Chess24 servers in 2021. And here we go. In the game, Ding Liren, instead of his usual 1d4 or c4, he does open 1e4 in this game, and Gukesh does go 1e5. Then we have knight f3, knight c6, and here bishop c4. The Italian game is the choice for Ding Liren. And very importantly, this game was played in the year 2021. Back then, Ding Liren was the number 2 rated player in the world, and Gukesh was only rated 2578. But despite the rating difference here, Gukesh, he gives Ding Liren the fight of his life. All right, now Gukesh, bishop c5, playing very solid. Ding Liren, he does castle, short castles, knight f6, and d3, defending that pawn on the e4 square. Now we have d6, c3, and a5 for Gukesh. Gukesh going for the a5 variation of the Italian game as black. The main idea is you are getting space on the queen side, and very importantly, stop a future b4 idea from white, and you also get the bishop on c5, a good retreat square on a7 if it needs it in the future. Now, the drawback of this a5 line for black is very, very simple. Here, the b5 square is weak, and white can go bishop b5 in the future, putting pressure on that knight and threatening the d4 advance. Now here, Ding Liren, rook e1 is the move, Gukesh goes h6, guarding g5, and so far this is the main line of the Italian. It's been played a bazillion times, so we are going to keep moving here. Alright, Ding Liren, knight d2 is the move, Gukesh does castle, short castles on the board, so far very standard, and here the main line for white is h3. That reaches the absolute main line of the Italian with the move a5, then black typically goes bishop e6, white typically goes bishop b5, and from there, black will have many different options. However, instead, in this game, Ding Liren, he does not go for the main line starting with the move h3. Instead, he goes knight to f1 here, intending a very fast knight g3, a very interesting sideline. All right, Gukesh, in the spirit of the main line of the Italian with a5, he does go bishop e6, challenging the bishop on c4. Now here, white, if he trades on e6 right away, black simply recaptures with the f-pawn, f takes e6, and those double pawns on the e-file, they're actually not weak at all. That newly created e-pawn would be guarding both the f5 and the d5 squares, and black would be doing just fine overall. So with that in mind here, Ding Liren, he does go bishop b5, and again, this is the main drawback of the early a5 from black. It does weaken that b5 square, and now the bishop is sitting cozy on b5. All right, here, Gukesh, he has many different options. Of course, white is putting a lot of pressure on that knight on c6. That means he may be threatening a very fast d4 advance. So with that in mind here, Gukesh, he has to guard against that idea. So, for example, bishop b6 and bishop a7 are both very playable, getting the bishop out of the way of a future d4 advance. However, instead in the game, Gukesh, he plays perhaps the strongest move here, simply knight to e7, and the idea of this is he wants to go knight to g6, and the knight will be perfectly placed on there. It's guarding e5, it's guarding the f4 square, and beyond that, now Gukesh, he is ready to go c6, driving back the bishop, and then d5, breaking in the center himself. Now, the drawback of this move is, of course, it is white's turn to move, and he can break in the center right away, and that is what Ding Liren does. So, d4, Ding Liren, despite being mostly a 1d4 player, he definitely knows how to play these 1e4 openings, including the Italian game. All right, now, Gukesh, in this position, he's got a couple of main options. You can just retreat the bishop right away, say bishop b6 or bishop a7, and on the other hand, you can also take on d4. Now, taking on d4 does give up the center. White is going to have those beautiful pawns on d4 and e4. However, it turns out that is the right strategy, provided you follow it up correctly. So here, Gukesh, e takes d4, then c takes, and then bishop b6, retreating the bishop, and very importantly, he does not go back to a7, as on b6, the bishop does not block the a-file, and black may want to go a4 and a3 in the future, gaining more space on the queen side, and if he does that, the rook will be perfectly placed on a8, so that is the idea of bishop b6 over, say, bishop a7. Now here, Ding Liren, knight g3, the very obvious move. The knight on f1, of course, was headed there, and now the knight does a great job of guarding both e4 and the f5 squares. Now here, Gukesh, in this position, he's got to find a plan. And there are two main ways to proceed as black in this position. First of all, you can go d5, breaking in the center. That's a very solid choice. And of course, if white wants to fight for an advantage, he will have to go e5, gaining space. Of course, if you don't do that, let's say if you go, say, e takes d5, you will have the isolated pawn on d4. That pawn could be a big weakness later in the game, so with that in mind, typically e5 will be the response. Now, the other idea is you can go bishop g4, putting immediate pressure on that d4 pawn as the knight on f3 is pinned to the queen on d1. So, for example, bishop g4, maybe knight g6, knight h5, and so on. Putting a lot of pressure on the king side is playable. But instead, in the game, Gukesh, he plays very solid, classical chess, and he does break in the center with the move d5. Now here, Ding Liren, again, if he allows d takes e4, or if he goes e takes d5 himself, he will have that very weak isolated pawn on d4. So with that in mind, the main way to fight for an advantage here is the move e5, gaining space and putting pressure on that knight on f6. Now here, Gukesh, his only good option is knight e4. If you go anywhere else with the knight, let's say, I don't know, knight e8, knight d7, knight h7, all of those squares are just very, very passive. You would have a very difficult position. So with that in mind, knight to e4 is the obvious move here. All right, now, Ding Liren, in this position, he has the option of just winning a pawn, that being that pawn on d5. And here's how you do it. Simply knight takes d takes, then rook takes e4 does win a pawn. But it turns out things are not so simple if you go down that route. For example, black can go queen d5, putting immediate pressure on the rook on the e4 square, then maybe rook a d8, again piling up pressure on that pawn on d4. And Gukesh, despite being down a pawn, he would have excellent counterplay. So with that in mind here, Ding Liren, he does not go for that line at all. Instead, the move is bishop to d3, just retreating the bishop, putting pressure on the knight. Now, of course, knight takes d takes, bishop takes is the threat. Therefore, you must move that knight. And the only good move here, of course, is knight takes g3, trading off one pair of knights, then h takes, and now Gukesh, he's got to find a new plan in this new sort of position. Now, his main way of getting counterplay here in the long run is going to be pushing that queenside pawn majority. If he can get those pawns rolling down the board, that will be his main source of counterplay. But in the meantime, white is going to have a lot of very aggressive ideas. For example, you can imagine bishop c2, then queen d3, threatening queen h7 checkmate. And if you go g6 trying to block, then the pawn on h6 would fall. Again, either way, white would have a deadly attack. So with that in mind, you really have to play defensively on the king side right away. Now, in the game, Gukesh, he finds the best way to do this immediately. And again, the main threat is you have to defend against this battery of bishop c2 and queen d3. And in the game, Gukesh does go bishop g4, an excellent idea. Here's why this works. Let's say white goes immediately bishop c2, then queen d3. Bishop c2, then the response is bishop h5. And if white goes queen d3, you are just in time to go bishop g6, skewering the queen and the bishop on c2. The light square bishops would trade off the board, and black would be doing perfectly fine. He may even have the advantage. So bishop g4, a very, very clutch move by Gukesh. Now, Ding Liren, he does switch plans a little bit. He starts bishop e3. Of course, that pawn on d4 was being threatened. For example, bishop takes d4 immediately was a threat, as the knight on f3 was pinned to the queen on d1. The knight could not defend. So bishop e3 defends, and now the rook on a1 is free to come into the game, say on c1, pressuring c7. Now here, Gukesh, the main line for him, or the typical strategy in this sort of position, is queen d7, bolstering the bishop. But before doing that, he does gain even more space on the queen side with the alpha 0 a pawn. He does go a4, gaining more and more space, and this is just a good multi-purpose move. I mean, first of all, you are gaining space. You're making ideas like b3 quite difficult for white. And beyond that, you also gain access to the a5 square for the bishop or the rook. For example, bishop a5 may be relevant later in the game, or rook a5, putting pressure on, the fifth rank. Now here, Ding Liren, rook c1, pressuring c7 with the rook, a solid idea, and it synergizes quite well with the move bishop e3. Now, Gukesh, he does go queen d7 here. The main idea, bolstering that bishop on g4 with the queen, making sure everything is safe and defended. Now, Ding Liren, a3. Now, this is not a move you typically want to make on the queen side. After all, this move does weaken the light squares. However, there is a secret idea here. Ding Liren, in the future, he may be intending bishop b1, then bishop a2, applying pressure on d5. And now, granted, right now, that may not be the best idea. However, in the future, that could be relevant if that pawn on d5 becomes undefended somehow. And beyond that, the idea of bishop b1, then queen d3 in general does become more attractive, as the bishop does have the other diagonal to go to in the future. So, good multi-purpose move by Ding Liren. Now, Gukesh, here, he really spices things up with this move knight to f5, jumping in with the knight and pressuring the white bishop, or the dark squared bishop of white, on the e3 square. Now, of course, if white wants to maintain that bishop pair, he must do something awkward like bishop d2 or bishop f4, but instead in the game, Ding Liren, bishop b1, he just continues his plan. And of course, the idea being, if knight takes f takes, then you're sort of out of time to block with bishop h5 and g6 in response to queen d3. So, interesting idea by Ding Liren. Now, Gukesh, here, he does not take on e3 right away. That may be a mistake. Instead, he does find the strongest move here, bishop h5, again, being just in time if white goes queen d3 to go bishop g6, and you are defending just fine. Now, Ding Liren here, he's got only one move to keep fighting for the advantage. And if you like puzzles, go ahead and pause the video right now and try to find the key idea for Ding Liren. And your one hint, this may be the most aggressive move in this position. And while you're at it, if you're enjoying this video, go and smash that YouTube like button for more videos just like this. It really does help me out a ton. Thank you so much. All right, now, Ding Liren, of course, if you go, say, queen d3, bishop g6 does blunt that whole idea. So instead here, Ding Liren, he plays the pawn sacrifice e6. Oh, I just love seeing this move on the chessboard, giving up the pawn, but opening up more lines of attack. Now, real fast, what's the idea? If you go f takes e6, then the move, believe it or not, is knight to e5, hitting the queen on d7, potentially giving up your queen on d1, but the tactics all work out in white's favor. For example, e6, f takes, knight e5, bishop takes, knight takes d7, hitting the rook, and you do have a lot of pressure on that pawn on c7. In the long run, white will be able to win back that missing pawn and have a great game. Now, instead of that, that actually is the strongest move, but instead in the game, Gukesh, he takes with the queen. Queen takes e6, maybe the first inaccuracy of the game. And as you can see, the eval bar is starting to drift up a little bit on the left side of your screen here for Ding Liren. All right, now, Ding, bishop f4, excellent move, good multi-purpose move, attacking both that pawn on c7 with the bishop and the rook, and beyond that, opening up the discovered attack with the rook on the queen on e6. So, excellent move by Ding Liren. Now, Gukesh, he's got to defend. What's the best way to defend? Well, it turns out queen c8 is the right idea. You just defend back with the queen. Overall, you're still doing relatively okay. But here, Gukesh, he decides it is time to trade on f3. Bishop takes f3 is the move, and this move turns out to be slightly inaccurate, but only if white finds the best recapture. Now, very importantly, of course, the queen on e6 is under attack, as is white on d1. It turns out rook takes e6 is not the right idea, as after bishop takes, white has his rook hanging on e6 versus the bishop on d1 of Gukesh. That is in Gukesh D's favor. Therefore, that is not the right idea. So instead here, white does have to recapture on f3, but how do you want to recapture? In the game, Ding did go queen takes f3, but this turns out to be a little bit of a mistake. Instead, going back one move here, if you recapture with a g-pawn, then you can follow up king g2 at some point, and it turns out that mini pawn fortress on f2, f3, and g3 with the king on g2 would be excellent for the white king. You even gain access to the h-file with the rook if you need it in the future, so overall, that would have been slightly more accurate here. But instead, queen takes f3, not a bad move at all. But the problem with this, here, the queen no longer defends that d4 pawn as it would on d1. Of course, queens can't move this way. And here, Gukesh, he just jumps in with the knight. Knight takes d4, winning back that free pawn, hitting the queen on the f3 square. And now the queen has to move. Okay, queen d3, excellent move, pressuring h7, threatening checkmate in one move. But here, of course, Gukesh, he is in time to defend queen g6, blocking the diagonal and offering the queen trade. Now here, Ding Liren, he knows he is the aggressor. He's down a pawn in this position, actually 2 pawns currently. He has to keep the attack going. Therefore, queen d1 is the move, opening up the discovered attack of the bishop on the queen. Now Gukesh, his queen must move, or he must defend somehow, some way. And in the game, he finds the strongest response. Once again, Gukesh just playing like he's a freaking madman in this game. F5 is the move, blocking the attack of the bishop and gaining space on the king side. That f-pawn is now a fighting piece in the game. All right, Ding Liren, he recaptures the first missing pawn. Bishop takes c7, a solid move. And here, Gukesh, rook a to c8 is the move, hitting the bishop, a slight inaccuracy. Perhaps rook a to e8 or king to h8 would have been a little more accurate. And now here, Ding Liren, he has the opportunity to just go bishop takes b6. That would be excellent. For example, bishop takes, then queen takes, then rook takes, and then at the very end, queen d2. And white would have an excellent attacking position. But instead, bishop f4, nothing wrong with that. Retreats the bishop, still playing very solid. And Gukesh, he does trade rooks here. Rook takes, queen takes, and then here in this position, he has the option of trading even more rooks and potentially heading an endgame up a pawn, and he can do that with the move rook to e8, challenging the white rook on e1. Now, instead of that, he does play safe. He retreats the knight, knight c6, and this move was not completely necessary as that knight on d4 was being defended by the bishop on b6. So, knight c6 overall, not really necessary, a little bit of a waste of tempo. And now, finally, we do see that benefit of the move a3 by Ding Liren played way earlier in the game. He does go bishop to a2, and look at this. The bishop lining up with the pawn and the king on g8. The bishop is just perfectly placed here. That Italian light square bishop coming to life once again. All right, Gukesh, he has the option of just defending with rook d8, defending the pawn on d5, but instead, surprisingly, king to h8 is the move, played in time pressure, I assume. Now here, Ding, bishop takes d5, winning back the pawn. Now both sides have those 2 pawns on the queen side and those 3 pawns on the king side. Material is once again even, except for the fact that Ding Liren does have the bishop pair in an open position. And according to Larry Kaufman's research, the experienced grandmaster, the bishop pair in an open position is worth at least half a pawn. And that is why the computer loves white's game here by, 0.79 pawns. All right, now Gukesh, rook d8, hitting the bishop, queen to c4 defends the bishop, and queen to f6 centralizes the queen a little bit and defends the rook preemptively. Now, we have bishop takes c6, b takes, and then rook e2, guarding along the second rank, and very importantly, guarding that very vulnerable b2 pawn. Now, Gukesh, queen d4, offering the queen trade. Will the queens come off? Yes, they do. Queen takes, then bishop takes, and now we have a roughly level endgame. White's bishop pair was given away with the move bishop takes c6, so now material is officially equal, and yes, black does have the slightly weaker pawns on the queen side, but overall, that is not such a big deal. The more important factor here is the activity of the pieces, and very importantly, black will have the open b file to attack that pawn on b2. It can go c5, defending the bishop, and overall, black is just perfectly equal here. All right, Ding Liren, rook c2, pressuring the c-pawn, then c5, as promised, defends the bishop. That bishop is just perfectly placed. All right, now, king to f1, rook d7, king e2, rook b7, again, pressuring b2 with 2 pieces. How's white going to defend? Well, bishop c1, that technically does defend, but here, Gukesh, he is officially in the driver's seat. All of his pieces, especially the rook and the bishop, are more active than the white counterparts. All right, now, rook b3, flying in with the rook. All right, Ding Liren continues to defend like the world champion that he is. Bishop e3, trying to trade off those bishops, and Gukesh, he simply takes on b2. Bishop takes b2, and now Ding has the option of taking on c5 with the bishop or the rook. This was the point of bishop e3. Rather than passively defending, he is counterattacking. But here in this position, he takes with the wrong piece. The right piece is rook takes f5, or c5, sorry. That way you are targeting f5 with the rook right away, and your rook is maximally active. But instead, bishop takes c5, the idea being he captures and defends that pawn on a3 with the bishop. But here, simply bishop takes a3 comes anyway, then bishop takes and rook takes, and now the rook is not in time to threaten f5. Yes, you can go rook c5 right away. For example, rook c5 was played in the game, but Gukesh will have time to defend with g6. And before doing that, he does go rook a2, hitting the king, king e3, and then g5. And now Gukesh, he finds himself in an endgame against the, number 2 rated player in the world. He's only rated 2578 at the time. This is 3 years ago, mind you. He was roughly 14 years old then. And he's up a pawn in the endgame with winning chances against Ding Liren. Oh my, all right, here. Rook c7 is the move for Ding Liren. Cutting off the king on the back rank, an excellent idea. The king's mobility is restricted. Now, king g8, rook a7, a3, king f3, king f8. So now the big question, can Gukesh find a way to make progress? If the rook stays on the 7th rank, what you would have to do is somehow march the king over to the queen side, threaten it, force the rook to move somewhere else, and then maybe go from there. All right, here. King e3 is the move. Then king e8, rook a6, king to f7. So Ding Liren giving up control of the back rank, the 7th rank, in order to threaten g6. Now, king f3, rook a1, king to e2 for Ding Liren, and it turns out this was a critical mistake. In that position, he simply had to play the move g4, trying to trade off one of those pawns on the king side. Now, the problem with not doing it right then is here Gukesh, he simply plays h5, locking down on that g4 advance forever. Gukesh, he is clearly playing for a win here. He wants blood. All right, f4, locking down the king side. Then rook a2, hitting the king. King f3, rook a1, king f2, king g7, rook a7, king f8, king e2, rook to ea2. Now the king must move. King f1 defends the pawn on g2, rook a1, king f2, king e8, rook a6. And here Gukesh, he has the option again of going, say, king d7, giving up the pawn on g6, then potentially trying to march the king down the board and so on. But instead in the game, a2 is the move, and this turns out to be quite a bit weaker. Here, rook a7 for Ding Liren, and now a lot of Gukesh D's winning chances are gone. So, king d8, rook a3, king c7, rook a4, king b6. Gukesh is marching his king down the board. Rook a8, king c5, rook c8, king d5, rook d8, king e6, rook e8, king f6. And we are going to fast forward a little bit through a few more of these moves up until right here. All right, here in this position, Gukesh, he's marched his king to h6. He's got to find some way of making progress. He doesn't think he can do it by going back with a king to the king side, or the queen side, sorry. Instead, he does play the pawn sacrifice h4, trying to loosen up some lines of attack on the king side. But this turns out to be maybe a slight inaccuracy. After g takes h4, then king g7, it's not so clear what Gukesh gained in return for giving up that pawn. All right, rook a7, king h6, king g3, marching the white king up the board, and very importantly, staying out of the way of checks by the rook. For example, if it went to king f3, then rook f1, followed by a1, promoting to a queen would end the game on the spot. So Ding Liren avoiding that trap. All right, now, rook c1 is the move, giving up that pawn on a2. Of course, if you don't take it, a1 will promote. Therefore, rook takes a2 is forced. Now, rook c3 hits the king, king f2, king h5, threatening the pawn on the h4 square. Gukesh, somehow, he is still playing for a win. Him having the more active king and the more active rook, those are huge advantages and more than offset the missing pawn. All right, rook a6 hits that pawn on g6. If king takes, then rook takes will be the move. Now rook c2 hits the king, king g3, and from here, both sides, they try to make progress up until this point right here, where Ding Liren does go g3, defending with the pawn. He's basically just playing for a draw, and now both sides, they try to make progress, but in the end, there's simply no way to make progress, and both sides do agree to a draw right here in this position. Wow, what a game played between the young Gukesh from 3 years ago and Ding Liren, at the time, roughly the number 2 rated player in the world. And I think this game really shows the full potential of Gukesh even 3 years ago, only being rated 2578, but literally going toe-to-toe, blow for blow with the future world champion Ding Liren. All right, Chess YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash that like button and check out this video right here, where Magnus Carlsen absolutely disrespects everyone's favorite cheating accuser, Vladimir Kramnik, on move 2. Yes, he did play a disrespectful opening on move 2. If you want to see that, check it out, and I'll see you in the next video.